Good day and welcome. My name is Jessica Hubble. I work for Nova Southeastern University's Department of Recruitment and Admissions for the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, the College of Psychology, and the Mailman Siegel Center for Human Development. Today we will be having Dr. Emmy Morales here speaking to us about behavior. Dr. Emmy Morales is a doctoral level board certified behavioral analyst. She completed both her master's and doctoral studies at Columbia University. During her time there, Dr. Morales taught in the public school system utilizing the principles of behavioral analysis, mentored graduate students, provided training sessions to public school teachers, and conducted research in applied behavioral analysis, or ABA. Dr. Morales currently serves as lead faculty of the ABA concentrations here at Nova Southeastern University. Her work is focused on the application of behavioral analysis to education and the preparation of students for careers in behavioral analysts. I'm going to go ahead and give the mic over to Dr. Emmy Morales.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. So I'm Dr. Emmy Morales. As stated, I'm a board-certified behavior analyst at the doctoral level. I'm also a CABAS master teacher, and that is the comprehensive application of behavior analysis to schooling. My journey with behavior analysis actually started right here at NSU in the behavior modification undergraduate course taught by Dr. Michael Voltaire. While in his course, I fell in love with behaviorism, and I actually heard a lecture from a local company who was looking for behavior therapists, and that's kind of how I got started. I worked as a behavior therapist doing home-based therapy. I continued in with all the courses in the minor, and I went from there. One of my mentors also went to Columbia, and I kind of followed her lead, and I went to Columbia. I completed my master's there and my PhD, and now I'm back here at NSU. So I came full circle. So it's great to be a shark. So you're a mess. Change your behavior. We're kind of just gonna dig right in. So what is behavior? Behavior is the activity of living organisms. So human behavior is everything people do, including how they move, what they see, what they think, and how you feel. When all else fails, you can always do the dead man's test, right? So if a dead man can do it, then it's not behavior. And that's it's a pretty simplistic way to view behavior and what it is. But it's important to know what behavior is before I can even go into behavior analysis and what I mean when I say applied behavior analysis. Behavior analysis is the scientific study of principles of learning and behavior. And there are two primary areas of study, which include the experimental analysis of behavior and applied behavior analysis. Now, the experimental analysis of behavior is the basic science of the discipline. So it includes a substantial and well-respected body of research literature on how behavior is learned and how behavior changes over time. The experimental analysis of behavior is the scientific foundation of applied behavior analysis. Now, when we talk about applied behavior analysis, or ABA, it's a systemic approach for influencing socially important behavior through the identification of reliably related environmental variables and the production of behavior change techniques that make use of those findings. So it says here on the slide, applied behavior analysis is, or the formal definition, I should say, is the science in which tactics and principles derived from the principles of behavior are applied to improve socially significant behavior, and experimentation is used to identify the variables responsible for the improvement in behavior. So what does a behavior analyst do? Practitioners of behavior analysis provide services consistent with the dimensions of ABA. So just a quick summary, behavior analysis, what is it that we do? We improve socially significant behavior and we decrease maladaptive behavior. And how do we do that? We provide these services that follow the 7 dimensions of ABA. And you can use the mnemonic device, get a cab, or GTACAB, get a cab. That includes generalization, or ABA includes generalization. It's effective, technological, applied, conceptually systematic, analytical, and behavioral. And I'll briefly touch on what I mean by by those things. So it has generality, behavior change that lasts over time across situations and settings. Behavior analysis is effective, meaning the change that's produced is actually significant, it's cost effective, it's efficient. It's technological, meaning our procedures are clearly defined and described. You can pick up our procedures and follow them with reliability, right? Our procedures are replicable. It's applied, meaning that we're interested in socially significant behavior. That's socially significant behavior is what's of interest. It's conceptually systematic, meaning that our procedures are based on the basic principles of behavior. It's analytical in that a functional relationship is shown. And what I mean by that is that we can confirm that it was actually what we did, or it was our intervention that functioned to produce this change in behavior or resulted in this change in behavior. And it's behavioral in that specific behaviors are targeted for intervention. And some of the services that we provide include behavioral assessments, analyzing data, writing, revising behavior analytic treatment plans, training others to implement components of treatment plans, and overseeing the implementation of treatment plans. Now, in order for us to be able to do all of these things, we have to know why it is you're doing what you're doing. So we talked about what behavior is, and we talked about what behavior analysts do. But in order to do that, we need to know why. And there are 4 functions of behavior. Another mnemonic device, SEAT. So sensory, escape, attention, tangibles. So sensory, are you doing this or are you emitting this behavior simply because it feels good? So when you cross your leg and you kind of shake it, or you're clicking a pen, are you doing that because it feels good? Or could there be some other reason? Escape, are you literally trying to escape the situation, or do you find something aversive and you're trying to escape? Your escape behavior may literally be running out of a room simply because you're escaping the freezing cold. Are you doing what you're doing for attention? Do you go by the same Starbucks every morning because you really like the barista? Or you're looking for some attention from that barista? Or is it because of the coffee? Is it for a tangible? Is that the function of your behavior? And it's important to know why it is that you do what you do, because even in that example, if I had intervened based on the idea that you were going to Starbucks simply for coffee and not for the attention of the barista, then there's no way that the intervention probably wouldn't be very effective, right? Because I wasn't actually pinpointing the function of your behavior or why it is that you are emitting this behavior. So 4 functions of behavior: sensory, escape, attention, intangibles. And sometimes there are multiple functions of behavior. Again, with my barista example, you may be going to Starbucks because you want the attention, but because you also want coffee. So any intervention that is implemented would have to take into account the function of your behavior, or both functions. So, like I said previously, human behavior is everything people do, including how they move, what they see, how they think, how they feel. And a lot of times, behavior analysis is only seen as a treatment for those with autism. And don't get me wrong, we absolutely do a lot of work with those who are on the spectrum. But I want to kind of take this time to go through some of the things that I've done outside of ASD. The beautiful thing about behavior analysis is that it doesn't necessarily have to be, it's naturally occurring, right? Meaning I don't have to do an intervention in order for you to see the principles of behavior at work. So for example, if you are walking past or you're trying to get downstairs and you want to use an elevator and you push the elevator button and the elevator door doesn't open, your behavior was just punished, right? The likelihood of you coming back and pressing that elevator button has decreased significantly than before your behavior was punished, right? And even if, let's say that's the first time, and you would probably press that button a couple more times, right? And we call that an extinction burst. You press it a couple more times, and to you it's just, okay, let me make sure it's actually not working. And in that case, Dr. Amaryllis didn't come in and decide, hey, I'm going to make sure that this elevator door does not open simply because I am practicing behavior analysis. It's simply naturally occurring. So I'm going to take a couple of moments just to go through some things that I have done outside of autism spectrum disorder. And so I'll read the title here. The effects of intensive tact instruction on the number of vocal verbal operants emitted in non-instructional settings and collateral effects on incidental language acquisition for 3 English language learners. That was a mouthful. But essentially what I did was I wanted to see how I could increase the speech of 3 English language learners, meaning English was not the primary language spoken at home. And what I did was I measured, says here, the vocal verbal operants emitted. So I went in non-instructional settings. So outside of actual instruction, reading, math, science, language arts, I wanted to see whether or not I could increase how many times these students asked one another for something or labeled something or engaged in a conversation with someone else. So typically developing students, children, they acquire vocal verbal repertoires through their experience reinforced by parents and caregivers. So you can see how if English is not the primary language spoken at home, it may be a little more difficult for you going into schooling where English is spoken to actually emit these vocal verbal operants or to actually ask questions or label things. So for children in low-income homes as well, these repertoires are not acquired, and sometimes it's simply because they lack reinforcement, right? So if you are not used to speaking English at home, or if you're not reinforced for using your words, that may become an issue later on. And that's why I also wanted to see, well, hey, if I am actually successful in increasing these children's speech, will that make a difference in their learning or in the way in which they acquire language? So briefly, I had 3 participants. All of them spoke Spanish primarily at home, and they were all preschool students. One was a kindergarten student. I looked at in non-instructional settings, so during playtime, in the hallway, during lunch, how many times how many man's tax sequelics were emitted. And what I mean by that was how many times did they request things? How many times did they label things? How many times did they engage in a conversation with a peer? And I also looked at how it is that they acquired language. So, and I'll try and be as brief as possible in this explanation of incidental language acquisition. So if you are walking down the street and someone says, oh, look, it's a blue jay, right? For someone who is developing their language, if you ask them the next day, hey, what's this? They might remember it's a blue jay, but you might also have to put a blue jay next to a parrot and say, hey, can you show me which one is a blue jay? And then maybe they may know it, right? But without incidental language acquisition, you need to be directly taught that this is a blue jay, meaning you need to be taught how to label it, but you also need to be taught how to receptively identify it. So when you're given other options, you can select it. And it's kind of like multiple choice when you're taking an exam. You may not necessarily be able to write out your whole response or vocally emit the correct response, but you may recognize it amongst the other non-exemplars. So incidental language acquisition is essentially how it is you're acquiring language. Do you need to be directly taught each thing, or can you learn something as a listener? Can someone point something out to you and then you later have it as a speaker? And the independent variable was intensive tact instruction. So basically, I wanted to provide reinforcement for speaking English. And I did that through teaching them common names of items that they didn't know in English. And when I say reinforcing them, I mean through huge parties for them every time that they emitted a correct response. So what that looked like is here on the left, you'll see before the intervention, and on the right is after the intervention. So after going through and teaching them 100 tags, right? So 100 labels of common items and providing reinforcement each time that they emitted a correct response, you could see that after the intervention, across all 3 participants, their vocal verbal operants increased, meaning they were requesting things more, they were labeling things more, and these are non-instructional settings, which means it's not within instruction. It's being in the play area with their friends. It's being in the hallway. It's being in the lunchroom, and that makes a world of a difference for a child, especially a child that's 4 or 5 years old, in terms of making school a fun environment or an environment conducive to learning. And in terms of incidental language acquisition, they did increase some of their responses on the listener side. So it did have an effect. It did have some collateral effects on incidental language acquisition. So that's just a brief snapshot on the application of a behavior analytic tactic, so intensive tact instruction, and the effect that it had on these English language learners. And that's the learning side. So I want to take a few minutes to kind of talk to you about behavior reduction as well. And again, this is just the one student who was not on the spectrum, was a little boy really having a difficult time, who kind of came in the middle of the year. And if you know anything about teaching, the middle of the year is usually when the teacher kind of has their classroom together. They've had the time to work out the kinks and kind of, make sure everyone knew what they were doing. And interestingly enough, the first time the kiddo came into my classroom, the kids kind of looked at me and they said, he is not following directions. And because they knew at that point in time, they knew what was expected of them. They knew how the classroom ran. So it was a very interesting experience for both of us, really. Sweetest little boy ever, but he came in like a storm. In a classroom of about 14 kids. He was kiddo 15. He was kicking, biting, screaming, throwing chairs. I mean, literally like taking plastic pennies and like pelting at people, spitting, like anything that he could do to get this attention he was doing. And like I mentioned before, one of the dimensions of behavior analysis is that we're behavioral, right, and technological. And so what we always want to make sure is that we know exactly what it is that we're looking at. And these are some of the behaviors that we actually measured. So any instance where he made physical contact with another person, where he threw or kicked a tangible object, including furniture, classroom materials, toys, any instance where he bit the body parts of another person or himself, any threats that were made, so a vocal statement about hurting another person, anytime he spat mucus out of his mouth or nostrils, that's fun times, any instances of screaming or crying. And trust me, when you realize that a room echoes, that's definitely when you want to scream, especially if it's intention that's maintaining your behavior, and instances of non-compliance again. And this is the graph. This is what it looked like. So we took some baseline data, and because of the severity of some of his behaviors, we really had to intervene quickly. And of course, because of the other children in the classroom as well. So we implemented, well, based on the data that we collected, the baseline data. So before actually intervening, we hypothesized that, and also through interviews and all sorts of observations and such, we hypothesized that his behavior was maintained by attention and escape. So I implemented a behavioral contract and a board game. And I have some pictures of the board game that I'll show you in a little bit. But essentially, I outlined what behavior was expected of him. We looked at it. Now, mind you, this is pre-kindergarten, so he signed the contract. And I signed the contract, but I basically said, hey, listen, these are the classroom rules. This is what's expected of you. If you follow these rules within, and I gave him a very short interval to begin with, if you can follow these rules for 2 minutes, then you get to move up. If you don't, move up on your game board. If you don't, then I get to move up. And so essentially he and I were competing. So that was a teacher versus student board game. And I'll show you that on the next slide. But I want to basically show you here that it worked. I mean, this is a kiddo who was kicked out of several classrooms, and here within 15 days, his behavior was at 0. And he actually maintained this behavior over time as well. I wish I had some of that data to show you. But Anecdotally, around the end, super bright boy, very intelligent. Like, I'm talking, once we got the behaviors under control, like, he genuinely loved schooling. And I always used to say he needed some love units. He needed learn units and he needed love units. And at the end of the school year, one of the other kiddos in the class said to him, "Hey, um, do you remember when you were bad?" And he looked at me and he looked at the kid and he said, "No, I followed directions the first time." And I said, "You know what? Forget the graph. That's how you know it worked." But so this is a kid, and I mean, you saw the list of behaviors that we were concerned with, who then went on to honestly be one of the star students within that classroom. And that's within 14, 15 days. So when I say effective, it truly is effective. And I know that both of my examples are in schooling, and that's really where a lot of my experience is. It's the application of behavior analysis to schooling, where essentially teaching is a strategic science. And being able to, one, ensure that students are learning, increasing vocal verbal operants, right? Especially at the preschool age, while also maintaining classroom management, being able to reduce these behaviors. It really allows for the child to maximize their learning. It allows an environment for the teacher to also ensure that the students are learning as much as they can and as quickly as they can. So like I said before, now this didn't occur in a vacuum either. So he specifically had his own teacher versus student game board, but within the classroom itself, there were certain contingencies in place that were based on behavior analysis. So the whole class had their own game board over here where they worked towards Fun Friday. So they got to move up a piece when they cleaned up in time or sat down when asked or were quiet or lined up. So essentially each behavior of interest was measured and the students were appropriately consequated, meaning they were provided reinforcement or correction when they emitted the correct response or when they were incorrect. And this is just an example of what a teacher versus student token board looks like. So he had the contract, he knew what was expected of him. We read it at the beginning of each interval. And I believe we started at 2-minute intervals. So if he followed all the rules that were outlined, then he got to move up a space. If he didn't, then I got to move up the space. Whoever got to the cat in the hat first won. And they won whatever that predetermined reinforcer was. And I think for him at that point in time, it was cars. So getting to play with the cars for 2 minutes or so. And we did that. And that resulted in this behavior change for him. A couple of other things that existed in the classroom was simply public postings showing the students how exactly to receive reinforcement. So dialing back to when I was talking about the functions of behavior, attention-seeking behavior is huge in classrooms, especially with kiddos as young as preschool. So showing these students how to access attention appropriately is important, and we did this through these self-management and performance tactics. And of course, we used token economies, and we also folded in the academics in there as well. So if you follow the classroom rules over here, then you earn pennies, quarters, nickels, depending on what grade it was. And if you need help counting, we can help you here. If you're in an older grade, you can tally instead of using money, or you can collect your points. And then you can trade it in. You can trade it in for a prize. You can trade it in for time coloring or puzzles or whatever is on the menu for that day. So we use a variety of tokens for class-wide token economies. And again, this is just one of the tactics within behavior analysis that simply works for everyone. I mean, we run on a token economy. We all go to work and we put in our time and we get a paycheck at the end. Excuse me. So basically, creating this within the classroom environment for the students. And with these standard tactics within the classroom, in addition to his own teacher versus student board, they both function to decrease his behavior. So I kind of gave you a little background on myself, on behavior analysis, what it is. So where do behavior analysts work? What do they do and why? And I did touch on what they did, and at least on my end, what I've done within the schooling environment. But behavior analysts really exist wherever behavior is, and behavior is everywhere. So essentially, behavior analysis is everywhere. At the bachelor's level, most behavior analysts, they work doing home therapy like I did, or in clinics. At the master's level, schools, businesses, clinics, hospitals, homes, group homes, and farms. I actually had a student of mine who's a dog trainer, and absolutely within any type of training, there are principles of behavior. And in businesses, there's organizational behavior management, or OBM, where you look at staff performance. And I actually had the privilege of working in a school that used OBM, where I was able to use student learning or students meeting objectives students meeting learning objectives translated into points for me, and the points were translated into getting a half day off, or honestly even getting vitamin water when you really need it. But this is all based on behavior analysis, and behavior is everywhere, so behavior analysis is everywhere. And at the doctoral level, it's all encompassing of those, what others do at the master's level. Typically, doctoral level behavior analysts also conduct research, they're clinical directors and such, and it really all depends on where you are as well. But behavior, it's almost a joke with me really in my classes. I ask my students all the time, give me a profession, give me a setting, and I'll tell you where behavior analysis is, or how behavior analysis can be used. So, reinforcement. These figures are compiled from Indeed.com, like recent postings in Florida. Florida specifically, sorry. And Glassdoor and PayScale, and it's the range and the median. And honestly, behavior analysis is the demand for behavior analysis is on the rise. The annual demand for individuals holding the BCBA certification has increased approximately 800% from 2010 to 2017. And those increases are seen in almost every state. So behavior analysis it's necessary. And again, which I touched on a little bit earlier, a lot of behaviorists work within autism. But again, like you can see in this slide, behavior analysis is everywhere. And even with my examples, and a lot of times it takes that one person to see behavior analysis within a different discipline. Here at the Melman Siegel Center, we have a pediatric dental clinic where there's a behavior analyst and a registered behavior technician. It's grant funded right now. In who's seeing patients with dentists. And again, it's just another example of how important really and relevant behavior analysis is, and how it can be seen across disciplines. So obviously these figures differ based on city and states. But yeah, this is the reinforcement for behavior analysts. So I say all this to say, the Melman Siegel Center for Human Development collaborates with both the Abraham S. Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice and the College of Psychology to offer concentrations in behavior analysis. So we have a Master of Science in Developmental Disabilities with a concentration in behavior analysis, a Master of Human Services and Child Protection with concentration in advocating for the child as a behavior analyst, and a Doctor of Education with concentration in special education and an emphasis in applied behavior analysis, all through the all through the Fischler College of Education. And within the College of Psychology, we have the Master of Science in Counseling with a concentration in applied behavior analysis. Students who complete their degrees and the concentration with us would qualify for option 1 in terms of BCBA certification, and all of this information can be found on the BACB website. So the pathway to becoming a BCBA or board certified behavior analyst is your degree, coursework, supervised experience, passing the exam, the successful completion of the exam, and certification. So in terms of your degree, as of right now, all of these requirements are going to change come January 1st, 2022, and I'll get into that in the next couple of slides. But as of right now, For those pursuing certification prior to January 1st, 2022, the applicant must possess a minimum of a graduate degree in an acceptable field of study. But because we have a verified course sequence, our degrees are considered acceptable for the board if the verified course sequence is completed within the degree. Coursework must come from a qualifying institution, and it must cover the required content outlined in the 4th edition task list. Again, all of these things can be found in the BACB website, and our course sequence is verified by ABAI, the Association for Behavior Analysis International, as meeting the requirements for certification. And then there's supervised experience. And for our master's students, there are 2 options. So completing independent fieldwork or completing practicum. And then once all of that is completed, you sit for the BCBA exam. And if you pass the exam, which you will, then that leads to certification. So in 2022, there are major changes to degree eligibility, coursework, and practical experience. In terms of degree eligibility, your degree can essentially be in anything. It just has to be a master's degree, and you must complete the concentration courses. So right now it is 6 courses. Come January 1st, 2022, there'll be 7 courses. Excuse me. And because of the changes in what is taught in these courses, it's highly recommended that one stick to either the 4th edition courses or the 5th edition courses. Now, in terms of practical experience, or sorry, here's an actual representation of the differences in requirements. So the current requirements, 270 hours of graduate coursework. Come January 1st, 2022, there'll be 315 hours of graduate coursework. Your master's degree right now must be in behavior analysis, psychology, or education, or a degree in which you completed a verified course sequence, and that's where our degrees fall in. That's the category our degrees fall into. Come January 1st, 2022, the master's degree or higher in any field of study is acceptable. Now, practical experience, you can see here in the charts, there's differences in the total amount of hours required as well as the supervision required for those hours. You can also see that there are only 2 categories in the post-2022 certification requirements. Now, the great thing is about MSc is not only do we offer these concentrations, but we also have on-campus clinical training right here with seasoned professionals. So we have our Bowdoin Preschool, the Capilla Family Starting Right, which is our early intervention program where the students and parents are actually in the classroom together. The Capilla Family Foundation Feeding Disorders Clinic, Capilla Family Foundation Challenging Behavior Clinic, and the Pediatric Dental Clinic, all based on the principles of behavior analysis, where we're able to offer clinical training. We have practicum courses for our master's students, and for those who actually work with us, we are able to provide supervised independent fieldwork opportunities. So in terms of certification, the January 1st, 2022, several things will change, but it will still follow. It'll still follow degree, coursework, supervised experience, passing the exam, and certification. And I guess I want to close with essentially behavior analysis is a science, and it can be applied across various disciplines, and that's really the reason for opening this credential up to all degrees, because it's clear how it can be integrated across these disciplines. So if you have any questions or thoughts about pre and post 2022 requirements, about behavior analysis as a whole, behavior analysis application to education, or even about any of our programs across both Fischler and the College of Psychology, please feel free to call me or email me, and this is all of my information. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's amazing. I actually do have some questions. When is our curriculum going to be changing to the new 5th edition?
We are actually offering the 5th edition come fall 2020.
Awesome.
Yes.
So any students prior to that would need to finish their coursework, practicum, and field experience
Yes.
prior.
Yes, we will be offering our fourth edition courses until the end of the summer 2021 semester, and students would need to complete all of their behavior analytic courses by then, and their core courses and the field work, and receive approval from the board to take the exam prior to December 31st of 2021 in order for the new requirements not to affect them. So they need to graduate, meaning they complete all their courses and complete all their field work, apply and be approved by the board to sit for the exam prior to December 31st, 2021.
Beautiful. And with the programs that we offer, do we ever allow students to kind of observe in any of our clinics that we have?
Absolutely. I actually serve as the clinical training coordinator here at the Melman Siegel Center as well. So those looking to observe or to volunteer, you can also reach out to me and I will give you an application. And that's across both of our preschools. So we have our Bowdoin preschool, and all of those students have individualized educational plans, and are on the spectrum or have intellectual disabilities. And we have our quote unquote typically developing preschool on the other side as well. The great thing about having these preschools available is that you also get to see the other disciplines. So we have speech, OT, PT, behavior analysis all in one building. And then we also have our clinics that are based on behavior analytic principles. And we have our developmental assessment clinic too, where we try and determine what these kids who have some, or kids with some concerns, where we're able to assess them as well. So yes, you're certainly able to come in and observe or volunteer.
Beautiful. That's really nice to have, especially if somebody's kind of on that fence.
Yes, exactly.
Speaking of being on the fence, what if somebody is interested in this type of program, but they kind of want to get their feet wet? Would you recommend maybe an RBT to kind of, because I mean, you just need a high school diploma
Yes.
for an RBT, right?
Yes.
And a lot of it does like on the job training, so they can get an idea of what it is and whether or not they really want to be in that environment.
Yes. The registered behavior technician credential they're essentially the front line. So they are the ones who directly implement these interventions with well, I don't want to say kiddos, because again, a lot of my experience is with children, and so a lot of times I say kiddos, but again, behavior analysis is for everyone, and it is everywhere. So they're the ones really directly implementing these interventions with the clients. So certainly, if you like to kind of get your feet wet and see if this is something that you really want to do, obtaining the RBT credential would definitely be beneficial. And it's honestly the way that I came about behavior analysis, because after completing Dr. Voltaire's course, I started working, as back then the RBT credential wasn't around, so I was a behavior therapist. And that's where I was able to see all of the things that were taught in class. And Dr. Voltaire's amazing. I love him. He is amazing. And I always credit NSU for really giving me the foundation in behavior analysis that was necessary for me to be successful. But it was really, I was able to bridge the gap between the instruction within the classroom and actually implementing these tactics, or actually essentially teaching as a behavior therapist. So definitely, if you're unsure or you kind of like this whole reinforcement punishment thing, but you don't really know how you can develop a whole career in it, I would absolutely suggest obtaining that credential. And honestly, even coming in and observing, as Jessica mentioned.
You just mentioned punishment. I was actually wondering about that. Do we always, like ABA or BCBA, do they always start with positive reinforcement? And if positive reinforcement doesn't seem to be working, you might have to try negative?
We absolutely always start with reinforcement, both positive and negative reinforcement. If absolutely necessary, then punishment procedures are used. But the science has grown so much, and there's so many tactics, and there's so much research on different interventions and treatment packages that all have, or that are all based on reinforcement, that are available to us, that we definitely, I mean, ethically, we absolutely always start with reinforcement interventions.
Now I'm going to go home and I'm going to give myself some positive reinforcement to change some of my negative behaviors. Thank you so much, Dr. Morales. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for doing this for us today. We really, truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
You have a wonderful day, everyone. If you need anything else, please feel free. Contact Dr. Morales, or you can contact the Department of Recruitment and Admissions. Our phone number is 954-262-7563. I'll repeat that. It's 954-262-7563. Or you can email us at gradschool@nova.edu. That's gradschool@nova.edu.